Welcome to the session. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Chen-Yang Xu, and I am the panel director for today's session at the 17th Harvard China Education Symposium. This panel was co-designed with Rongbin Shen as we observed an ongoing concern across both research and practice side. Technology is entering our classrooms way faster than teacher development. This raises an important question. How can educators maintain strong professional judgment and ensure that technology enhances rather than replaces high-quality teaching?
Hello, everybody. I'm Rongbin Shen. In addition to being a panel director, I want to join you today as a practicing educator here in Massachusetts. As a teacher on the front lines, I grapple with the practical reality of questions Chen-Yang just raised. How do we define AI literacy in a way that actually serves our daily work? And how do we leverage these tools for efficiency without losing the human art of content delivery and classroom management? Our research leading into the panel has confirmed that these questions are truly universal. Whether in China, the United States, or Europe, educators are navigating the same transition tonight. And we are honored to move from theory to practice and to push this global discussion forward. So welcome, everybody.
After months of preparation, we are excited to open this panel, Initiating Change Teacher Empowerment. Today, we explore how human wisdom and technology can work together. Our message is clear and simple. When good teaching comes first, technology can make learning stronger. Together, they can create something greater, a future when 1 plus 1 is more than 2.
To dive into these layers, we have structured today's session around learning sciences, classroom management, and AI literacy. We're incredibly honored to be joined by our three distinguished experts. First, Dr. Tori Chust, Professor of Learning Technology at UMass Amherst, and a well-known voice in AI and digital learning. Secondly, Michael Lindsay, founder of Smart Classroom Management and a leading expert on foundational classroom leadership. Third, we have Dr. Allison Butler, Director of Media Literacy Program at UMass Amherst and an expert in critical media education.
Welcome to our speakers. Before we begin, here are a few quick notes to help everything move smoothly. So for our Zoom participants, welcome. Please stay muted and keep your camera off during the presentations. Thank you. This helps us avoid interruptions. For questions, we kindly ask you to save them for the roundtable discussion at the end. For our live stream audience, whether you are joining on YouTube, WeChat, or RedNote, you are welcome to post questions in the chat. Our volunteers there are monitoring these platforms and will share your questions during our discussion session. Thank you very much for your cooperation.
To begin our journey, we must first look at the why and how of learning. Our first speaker is an expert in bridging the gap between pedagogical theory and digital practice. Please welcome Tori. Tori is the professor at UMass Amherst and previously served as the ISTE president of the Teacher Education Network. She's a leading voice in how we can use learning technology to support, rather than just replace the human element of teaching. Tori, the floor is yours to help us explore the core logic of learning.
Thank you, everyone. I'm excited to introduce you a model that I came up with in response to the launch of generative AI technologies and the panic that came after these technologies came out. And instructors said, I'm banning all technologies in the classroom because my students are just going to cheat all the time, or fears around these tools, concerns about how students were using them. And so I was thinking a lot about how do you design learning so that students want to engage in the learning rather than turning to AI or another source for help doing their work for them. So I came up with the trust model, and it is a model based on theories of motivation and learning, steeped in the evidence of best practices for teaching. So if you are an educator, you're probably doing many, if not all of these things. This is really meant to serve as a reminder of some small and some large changes that you can make in your practice to inspire students to engage, and it's really focused on effective learning design. So we'll start with the first letter, which is transparency. This is something that I think we do not do well as educators across the board in K-12 and higher education. We are experts in teaching and often in our fields that we are teaching about, and we know why we're asking students to do what we're asking them to do, whether it's to write a paper, write a discussion forum post, take a test, engage in a quiz. But often students do not know, and we assume that they know, but making that assumption is where you'll actually have some students completely disengage. So when it comes to transparency, there's a really great framework called the Transparency in Learning and Teaching Model, or TILT in higher education. And it's about making the purpose of the assignment or the activity or the task very clear and transparent, how to complete the task clear and transparent, and how they will be graded. And I could tell you an example of this in my own class. I had an assignment where I was asking my students to write a 600 to 800 word blog post to look at different resources across the internet and make an informed decision. I gave them 50 minutes to do this in class time, and they were in groups of 3. And I actually had 3 groups with students crying at some point during the class. And it came down to they were so panicked about reaching the word limit of 600 words in 50 minutes with 5 resources. And I was like, that was not actually the point of the activity. The point of the activity was that you could grapple with the fact that there are different resources that say one thing and other resources that say another thing, and how do you make an informed decision? And I realized I did not make that clear to them. And so they were so focused on getting the word limit right and not on the actual purpose of the task. That it made a big difference. So moving forward, next slide, you'll see that really in everything from my midterm exams to activities in class, I highlight why am I asking students to do what I'm asking them to do? And this is especially important when you're doing things like write a discussion forum post and reply to 3 peers. Students hear that all the time and they strongly dislike doing that. They don't know why they're being asked to do that. That's very different than telling them, write a discussion forum post and reply to 3 peers because I want you to feel like you are part of a classroom community. And in doing so, it will help you build your social knowledge as you interact with others. It'll help you build your communication skills, which you'll need in your future job. Like, those 2 things are very different. Do this versus here's why I'm asking you to do this. And I think transparency is one of the simplest and easiest changes you can make to your practice. And I strongly encourage you to look at that TILT framework, because you can just start putting things at the top of an assignment, a document, or a slide to say, here's why I'm asking you to do what I'm asking you to do. It also kind of forces you as an educator to think, why am I asking students to do this? And that's really important as educators. You always need to be asking that yourself. The next part is real world applications. So there's a quote from David Wiley, next slide, who talks about the difference between disposable assessments and renewable assessments. Far too often, especially in higher education, students experience what's called a disposable assignment. The faculty member tells them to write a paper, they write the paper, they submit it to the faculty grades the paper, returns it to the student looks at the paper, maybe looks at the feedback, probably looks at the grade, and then just disposes of the assignment. Back in the day when they were handwriting that by paper, literally it went straight to the trash can. This happens far too often in education across the board. We're asking students to do things just to make sure they're doing things or do things for a grade. And many students often check out when they feel like there's no value in the assignments they're being asked to do. Not every assignment has to be a renewable assignment, but bringing some more renewable assignments into your practice can really make a difference in motivating students. So a renewable assignment, it differs from a disposable assignment in that the student's work won't be discarded at the end of the process, but instead will add value to the world in some ways. And there are so many different ways to do this. One example you see here on the screen is I have my students create children's books. We use everything from Book Creator to Story Jumper to even Google Slides in a book style format to teach their peers about the, I'm getting an echo here. Any idea what's causing that? Someone else's. Oh. All right, let's test that again. Better. Okay. Sorry about that. I think someone else had their microphone on and it was just echoing. So in this example here, I have my students, they were learning about digital citizenship, they're future teachers. And so in doing so, they had to create children's book to teach friends or family members, younger siblings about digital citizenship. In doing this, it's not they write a paper about digital citizenship, I look at it, I grade it, and then they throw that paper out. In this case, they have books that they can put in their digital portfolio, that they can share in their future classes, that they can post on social media and share out with the world. In another example, I have my students go to social media and engage in advocacy campaigns. In this one here, I had my students do accessibility testing for different digital tools and apps in one of my classes called Digital Tools and Apps for 21st Century Learners. And they found that early on when Kahoot came out, it was not accessible for blind and visually impaired individuals. And I had one student, as you see on the screen here, take to Twitter and say, hey, Kahoot, what's going on here? Why is this not designed for everyone? And actually someone from Kahoot did reply to their tweets, so our students can be really empowered using social media, advocating, sharing their knowledge with the world. Another example is when I have my students redesign inaccessible experiences or hostile architecture or just design something that's needed in the world. In this example, my student found that her elderly parents were struggling to read food labels because they're so small. So she redesigned one using QR codes and bigger font based on design principles. Next example. This is one of my favorite things to do is I have my students design a real or fake image, AI generated images, as well as websites. So real websites versus fake websites, and same with social media posts. And they turn that into a Google form branching game and have their friends and family members actually try out their game and see if they can trick their friends. But also it's an educational tool that gives feedback immediately to teach people about information literacy and AI literacy. And so my students really love this because they get to create something that they immediately share out with their friends and family. Other things that I've had my students do is we've written a book together as a class. I have students write different pages or different chapters of a book, and then we publish it together online. Sometimes we'll publish it on a platform called EdTech Books. Sometimes we'll just publish it as a Google Doc and share it out on social media. And through my research, I've found that engaging students in these kind of projects, these renewable assessments where they are creating something that has value, that has meaning, that produces something that is shared out with the world, it not only helps them achieve the learning objectives, but it also increases their motivation, improves their attitudes about learning, and supports the development of valuable 21st century skills. The next part of the trust model is universal design for learning. And in this comic that you'll see pop up on the screen, you see that there's someone who is shoveling the stairs to get into the school while the ramp still has snow on it. And the individual in the wheelchair says, if you shovel the ramp, we can all get in. And the individual said, oh, I had not thought about that. Universal design for learning comes from the concept of universal design, which is a construction term from many decades ago, thinking about how do you build buildings to make sure absolutely everyone can access what they need to access. In this case, if you shovel the ramp first, people in wheelchairs, people with bikes, people with strollers, people with mobility issues can get up the ramp along with everyone else. If you just do the stairs first, you're creating barriers. And so in education, the concept of universal design for learning talks about how do you break down barriers for learning? And this is something I think we can all work on as educators. CAST has a whole website that goes through the Universal Design for Learning guidelines. There's three kind of main aspects: multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression. And I think, honestly, for me, looking through all of their criteria and examples, it really boils down to student choice and voice. If you can give students choices for how they engage in learning, if you can allow students to bring their voice into the classroom, that breaks down a lot of barriers. For example, I give my students choices on what to complete for an assignment, and sometimes I'll give like a high-tech choice, a low-tech choice, one that's part of a group and one that's independent. And that way, instead of, if I have a student who has a lot of social anxiety and is really nervous about working with a group, or if I have a student who does not have access to high-speed internet at home, they could pick the low-tech version. Giving those choices means that they can pick the one that works best for them, and it reduces barriers to learning. Strongly encourage you to check out the Universal Design for Learning guidelines if you're not familiar with them, because I think it's one of the best ways to break down barriers for learning, but also engage students and motivate them to engage in learning. On to the S of the trust model, which is social knowledge construction. This is so important in education. Pretty much every type of learning that happens is social. You learn by talking to others. You learn by watching others. You learn by engaging in debates and discussions, by reading the thoughts written by others. And yet you go into classrooms and students are told not to talk with one another or not to collaborate because that's considered cheating. But outside of the classroom, learning is entirely social. So I think students need more opportunities to engage in social knowledge construction, but I'm not saying we need more group work. There's a lot of different ways that social knowledge construction can happen. So in the first example here, this is one of my previous doctoral students. He was a high school teacher for technology. He had his entire class work together on building a virtual reality video to bring awareness around domestic violence. And they went out into the community and actually shared their videos at different festivals and got feedback from the community. In this example, this is social media influencers who are out there reading books and inspiring others to read books. This is something your students can do. They can create TikTok style videos or Instagram worthy videos. I don't say you have to use TikTok or Instagram, but I say Instagram worthy, and they get really excited to make videos like that in my classes. But that's another way to engage students in social learning. And this example here, I had for my students often write, short papers for me, and sometimes I'll pick the ones that really stand out, and I'll send them to my friend who runs a very popular education blog, Learning as I Go, and she'll pick some to actually publish on her blog. So my students get a publication credit on their resume, and also it's a way that they get to share their knowledge out beyond the classroom. And the last one here is my absolute favorite way to bring social learning into the classroom is to have students design an assignment or do whatever they're doing for homework, but get feedback from 3 to 5 peers or friends or family members or anyone else who's willing to talk to them. So I'll say, go design a game or go design a mind map or go design this, but then get feedback from 3 to 5 others like your parents or whatnot, and then write that feedback that you got, and then also your reflection on the feedback and any changes you made to whatever you created based on that. And I found that my students, this not only breaks down the walls of the classroom, but my students get really motivated to design something when they know they have to share it with others and get that type of feedback. There's so many tools for social knowledge construction. There's ones for, like Padlet and idea boards for just sharing information. There's entire Google suite or Microsoft suite, or there's tools out there. So a lot of times I heard during, the pandemic that, oh, we can engage our students in social knowledge construction in a remote or online setting. And I want to say there's actually a lot of tools out there that easily allow you to do what you can do in the classroom in a virtual setting if you just know the right tools. So I've listed a couple up there, but there's several others you can use to engage students in a lot of different types of social learning. The last part of the trust model is trial and error. And I think this is one we often forget about because of the high stakes level of learning that often happens in classrooms. We have one assignment and students have one chance to complete that assignment. In my own, experience as a parent of a toddler right now, I can't tell you how important trial and error is in figuring out life as a parent. If someone asked me, if I was taking a class on parenting, for example, and someone told me I had to get my child to sleep through the night for my midterm exam, by, I don't know, 18 months, I would have failed miserably. And I would have felt I was a terrible parent, right? I had my one chance to show I'm a great parent. I took the midterm, I failed, that's it. But that's not how parenting works. Like literally every night I'm in there, I'm like, I need to adjust the thermostat. I need to make sure his diaper is at this level, or he's wearing the right pants, or the right socks, or the music's on, or whatever it is. Like that's how learning happens outside of the classroom. We're figuring things out every single day. And then students come into the classroom and it's the opposite. They have one chance to show their knowledge on a quiz or assignment or big assessment. And maybe they didn't sleep the night before because they were caretaking for a younger sibling, or they were up late working a job to bring in money for their family, or they were just sick the whole week, or they're studying for 7 other classes and they didn't do that well that one time. And that's it. That's their grade that affects their overall grade in class. So in the quotes that I have up on the screen here, I think this is very important for everyone to look at. Students may want to learn, but in their experience, what they find out is even though learning is a process that requires risk, failure, and making connections. Next slide, you'll see that current assessment practices don't often reward that and might actually discourage it. So one of the best things I think you can do is help students learn through trial and error, and remember that failure is a part of learning. I fail every day as a parent, but I keep on trying and I learn alongside my student. I fail pretty much every class as a teacher, but that's also how I learn. Bringing failure, risk, trial and error, and learning through feedback from others, from the teacher, is really a way to engage learners and bring down that really high stakes, one-shot level of showing your knowledge. So to wrap up here, this is the trust model for engaging learners and increasing rigor in the age of AI, but really just throughout time, this is based on theories of motivation and learning. Thank you all. Oh, I forgot I had this here. How are we doing on time? I got like 3 minutes, yeah?
Yes, I think you still have 3 minutes.
Oh, yes, I'll take it. All right. So, this really quick, because I think it's helpful to see an example of what I just talked about, right? And so here's an old activity I used to have my students do is I would have them analyze privacy policies of digital tools and apps as future teachers to figure out which ones to use in their classroom. In this activity, they would go through and they would create a mind map to track how data is collected, where it's used, where it's shared. This is something AI can actually do very easily nowadays. I thought, why am I asking them to do that? So in the next slide, you'll see I completely redesigned this activity so that they actually had to go out and convince at least 30 friends, family members, anyone who would listen to them, 30 people, to change their data protection practices. And so they could do it individually, they could do it in groups, they could decide how they would do it. They could create a video and share it with their friends of how to disable cookies or change their privacy settings or reduce location sharing on their phones. They could just go talk to people. They could design a website, create a series of memes. So as you see, there's a lot of universal design for learning. There's a lot of choice in there. There's a lot of trial and error built in. It's all built on social knowledge construction and real world application. And the transparency, you see how I built out the slides to say, hey, you're going to help others take control of their data and their privacy to protect them from potential harms. What I've seen from this is students love this activity. They are super engaged. This is not an activity that AI can do. And the videos that they share with me as evidence of going out and getting their friends to change their privacy settings or turn off location sharing, they feel really empowered. They get to take the knowledge from class and go out and make a difference right away. So this is an example of how to transform an activity or assignment using the trust model to inspire students and engage them in motivating ways.
Thank you, Tori, for that insightful look at the science of learning, and that is really the foundation of our talk today. It's clear that even the most well-designed instruction depends on a classroom environment where students can focus, participate, and feel supported. So our next speaker brings over 30 years of K-12 teaching experience and the perspective of 8 best-selling books on classroom management. Please welcome the founder of Smart Classroom Management, Michael Lindsay. Michael will explore the 3 biggest causes of teacher stress, all closely connected to classroom management. and share practical ideas to help educators reclaim their leadership in classrooms. Michael, welcome. And a reminder that we will stop screen sharing at this part, and we are now enabling simultaneous interpretation in Chinese. Rongbin will kindly do the translation, and if you would like to listen to the Chinese audio, please click the globe icon at the bottom of your screen and select Chinese. 所以这一部分我们会开启中文的同声传译，有需要的观众，请您点击屏幕下方的地球形图标，并选择这个中文频道进行收听。Thank you, everyone. I'm stop sharing the screen, and Michael, the time is yours.
Okay, so yes, we are discussing the three things that cause the greatest amount of stress in the classroom. These are three things that teachers do. They are all related to classroom management or behavior in the classroom. They tend to lead from one to the next. I visit a lot of classrooms and I see these behaviors in most classrooms, but especially in those classrooms where the teacher is really struggling with behavior. The reason why they're so common is because they're often recommended. So these three things are recommended by behavior experts. Often they're recommended by administrators and counselors in schools. They also make sense. So instinctually, they're things that we do as teachers, but they cause misbehavior to get worse over time. And it's also important to mention that these three things that teachers do, they can improve behavior in the moment, but they make managing a classroom much more difficult as time goes on. So regardless of how much or how little technology you're using in the classroom, I think these three things are very important. I'm also going to, when we finish talking about these three things, I'm going to tell you what you can do instead, how to replace these with just two things. Okay? You may see me looking at my notes. This is a really important topic, and I want to make sure I cover everything. Okay, so the first thing that teachers do, and this is often as first-year teachers, but I see this with veteran teachers also, is they try to convince students to behave. And so the way this looks is through lots of pep talks and motivational speeches, pulling students aside to discuss their behavior with them, to counsel them, to tell students what to think and how they should feel. This is really common. There's a lot of appeasing students and flattery because there's such a strong desire in teachers to improve behavior. And this is where this stems from. So there's lots of chatting. Sometimes you'll see what they call community circles or morning meetings where the teacher and the students will discuss misbehavior. There'll be a lot of kind of hashing out things and students telling on each other and complaining about bullying and this sort of thing. And so the teacher's talking these things over and convincing students that this isn't the right behavior. Again, it makes sense, right? It should work. But the burden of showing up every day as a teacher and of thinking that you have to every single day come up with the right mix of words in order to get students to behave is incredibly stressful. And again, this is something, if you pull a student aside, this is something where you may be able to improve their behavior in the moment. but it doesn't actually lead to change in behavior, which we'll talk about at the very end. The second thing, I'm not sure if I mentioned, I did mention that one leads to another. And so often what happens is teachers get very frustrated, and rightly, when they have this burden and when they're doing this and they're not getting a lot of seeing a lot of progress and improved behavior, improved listening and attentiveness and those sorts of things. What happens is it leads them to start using intimidation. And these are wonderful, the most wonderful people kind of fall into doing this because teaching can be so stressful. And when the students are disrupting the class and the teacher's having trouble teaching, then they can start doing things like raising their voice. And again, these things work in the moment, which is why it happens again and again. The teacher raises their voice, they'll pull a student aside to question them or to lecture the student. You see a friction developing between the teacher and the students. There's resentment there. So when I visit classrooms that are really struggling with classroom management, it's the teacher on one side versus the students on the other. There's a battle there. And so it's a real struggle to get students to listen and follow directions when there is animosity between the two. And this is when you see students flaunting misbehavior in front of the teacher or even misbehaving behind the teacher's back. Teacher will use sarcasm. And again, some of the most wonderful people find themselves being the kind of teacher they never wanted to become because of this frustration. You see a lot of glaring also, and then teachers moving into students' personal space. And so, again, this causes lots of disrespect from the students initially, but it also comes out in disrespect from the teacher. The teacher starts thinking about whether they like their students or not, this sort of thing. And this leads to the third thing that causes a lot of stress, a tremendous amount of stress, is the teacher gets some advice, looks up things online, and decides that they're going to reward students in exchange for good behavior. And so this looks like prize boxes or tickets and tokens that students earn in order to then purchase toys, trinkets, candy, this sort of thing. Or the teacher will say, if you pay attention and participate during this lesson, you will get X. And it works. It works in the moment. The problem with this approach, there are two big problems with this approach. The second one is devastating, but the first one is that what it does is the teacher realizes that after 2 or 3 rounds of a particular prize, what happens is that students get bored and they take it for granted. And the teacher needs to up the ante, constantly upping the ante, and also shortening the time between offering such things. And so after a while, they're passing tickets out or tokens out or prizes out for everything the students do, lining up for lunch or taking their laptops out the right way. All these things are what happens in a token economy. Token economies are really popular because they work initially. Terribly, terribly stressful. to constantly every day have to come up with things that students find interesting or motivating enough, externally motivating enough to get them to do something that you want them to do. The worst thing about this, the most devastating thing about token economies and about giving rewards in exchange for behavior. And by the way, that's not to say that we don't use praise. We still use praise. It must be worthy praise. So based on new learning or effort or performance that goes beyond what a student has done before. So we do praise as a form of feedback. But what happens if you're using rewards throughout the day and these token economies is that you're teaching the student realizes that you're paying them. If you're paying them to do something, then you're telling them it must be work. And so if it's this external payment, that it must be difficult, it must not have any inherent value. Your lessons must not have any inherent value. Your subject matter must not be valuable. Otherwise, why would you have to pay them to pay attention to it? And if you pay them for it, then they won't, or they'll do it only if you give them something. So learning goes way down. Intrinsic motivation is completely snuffed out. And misbehavior then goes up, and it eventually leads to chaos. And it's difficult for the teacher to keep this up. So I see these being cycled: convincing and intimidation and rewards. And the teacher, teachers are very guilty. I speak to a lot of teachers, coach a lot of teachers, and there's a tremendous amount of guilt around all three of these. The first one feels manipulative because it is. So they'll use false praise. In other words, they'll say, they'll praise a particular student, not because they mean it, because they're trying to influence the students around them. I like how Anthony is sitting and paying attention. And they'll say it like that in order to get the other kids around to think, I want praise too. But you're using that student, it's manipulative, it's not true, and you're praising for something that is a common expectation, which lowers the bar on excellence in the classroom. And then all teachers, no matter how much emotional control they have, it is really, really difficult not to have those emotions come out in the face of disrespect, in the face of interruption to learning. And then the rewards feel great. Teachers think, oh my gosh, I finally found it. But again, achievement is lowered. Students don't have any more intrinsic motivation. They don't enjoy coming to school. They don't enjoy being part of the classroom. And then your lessons, they kind of lose all of their meaning and the joy of being and learning in the classroom. So this brings us to, what do we do instead? How can we get rid of these? And by the way, whether you do anything else or not, I recommend, if you're doing any of these things, just completely remove them from your classroom, because they'll just lead to more stress and worsening behavior. But I do want to mention that, so I started Smart Classroom Management in 2009 based on these two things I'm going to show you. And since then, I've written more than 800 articles in support of these two. The reason why I'm mentioning that is because this sort of just touches on it. This touches on it. You may have lots of questions, which I'm happy to answer during the Q&A portion. But the solution is, again, twofold: a classroom management plan and the love of class, or the love of your instruction. So a classroom management plan is a simple set of rules and consequences, the rules of which protect the rights of every student in your classroom to learn and enjoy being part of your class. That's it. Your job is to teach them explicitly and in extreme detail, model them so your students know beyond any doubt what does and doesn't constitute following them, so they know exactly where the line is, and your only job is to enforce the stated consequence. Now, there's no magic in a particular set of rules and consequences. The magic is in your consistency following them and ensuring that every misbehavior, everything that can possibly interrupt learning, disrupt learning, is covered. Anything that interferes with the student's enjoyment, bullying, or anything else has to be protected. Those rules have to state clearly in such a way that protects that. Now, we have rules at Smart Classroom Management. We have what we recommend that have been proven effective. But again, even those, there isn't any kind of magic with that. The consequences, this is really important. We recommend a timeout or time away area as a particular consequence. And the reason is, and this is what really changes behavior. So this does not, right? But what we do is, because we're taking you out of the equation, you're farming out all misbehavior to your classroom management plan, and you're focusing on great lessons. It allows you, gives you the freedom to be a great teacher, which is what it's all about. And in turn, students love being part of it because you're teaching great lessons. You have amazing content knowledge, and you have all this knowledge and skill to give to your students. And we talk about how to do that, how to create better lessons that students love. But not doing these things also frees you to enjoy your students, to be calm and easygoing and make jokes with your students and not worry about the behavior part of it. But what this does is it causes a student who loves being part of the class, and they all will eventually, if you're focusing on intrinsic motivation, the student will sit out and think to themselves. If you don't tell them what to think and how to feel, they come up, when they love their class, of their own accord. They reflect on their misbehavior and they choose not to do it again. They decide, because you give them time to reflect, and they think, I want to be part of that. Because all kids, all people want to be part of something bigger than themselves, something special. We all think back to that teacher we loved in that class we loved. That's what this is all about. This is what allows us to do that. We drop our stress level. We focus on great teaching. The kids love being there. And if by chance they misbehave, they're less likely to in that situation. But a challenging student, in case they misbehave, we do give them a chance to sit out, and they think to themselves, I don't want to be here. I want to be there. And they come back, and we welcome them with open arms, give them a fist bump, and they're back in. And when they decide, not us, convincing, intimidating, rewarding, and all this kind of stuff, when they decide, then real change happens in behavior. And so our only job is to follow our classroom management plan. I say robotically or matter-of-factly. And then my only job is to create great lessons. I've been asked a lot, like, what do I focus on my first day of school as a teacher? And my answer is the same. I want them to love coming to my classroom. I want them to love being there. I want them to run home, every student, and say, oh my gosh, I love this particular class. Because it makes things easier, and we're already starting to crank up that intrinsic motivational engine. And that's what separates great teaching from mediocre teaching. And we've been kind of lied to about these things. Sometimes we lie to ourselves because it's natural to do this. And then most of the advice is this, most of the advice you'll hear in public education. It's one of the reasons why public education is failing here in the United States and in lots of countries. Okay, I hope that helps. It was great speaking with you. I look forward to hearing what you have to say and your comments and questions in the Q&A portion. See you.
我们不应该去说服，或者我们应该让他们自己进行决定。
Thank you, Michael. I will start my screen sharing again. So Michael, your reminder that reclaiming the room, reduce stress is meaningful for so many educators joining us today. Now that we've explored the science of learning and classroom management, we turn to the media and information that students are consuming and navigating every day. So, our final speaker today is a leading scholar in media literacy and communication. Addison is a senior lecturer and associate chair of communication at UMass Amherst, and serves as the vice president of the Media Freedom Foundation. Addison will guide us today through the critical role of AI literacy and pedagogical judgment in today's landscape. Welcome, Addison.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm a little bit intimidated to follow these two folks here, but hopefully I can maybe bring some of everything that we've talked together a little bit, and think through the way that we think about critical AI literacy, which I think is really tough today. So I really actually want to start with some of what Tori talked about, and building that idea of a trust model, and how to grapple with different material and evaluate sources. The thing with AI literacy is that we're all learning this together, right? This is the time where with applying the concepts of critical media literacy, we could really maybe get ahead of the AI stress, the AI struggle. So here's what I want to start with is the popular conversations on the AI and education intersection that we are seeing today. We get these blanket statements, right? All students all the time are using AI to cheat. In fact, in my class this semester, one of the first things I had them read was a few op-eds about AI and in education. And that was pretty much one of the headlines was all of your students are cheating, right? My reaction to that, particularly coming from a critical media literacy position, is how on earth do we prove that all students are cheating? There's no way we could actually get data on that, right? Are students cheating? Sure. Are a lot of students cheating? Probably. But our students have been cheating since long before AI came. And no all can actually do everything, right? So I think we have to think about that differently. I think we also have in our conversation these days this kind of vibe about AI. from the sort of student perspective. If I say I'm not cheating, then I'm not cheating, right? This to me is the logical end result of a culture of convenience. Everything else in our world has become quote unquote convenient, although personally I find a lot of it less than convenient. We have all of our shows streaming. We can watch an entire season in one sitting. We do not have to wait for the next week's episode. Amazon shipping gets us our products, what we've ordered, sometimes in less than 24 hours, right? Text messaging, if we don't get a response right away, that means that something might be the matter. On the flip side of that is education feels cumbersome, right? It feels complicated. And so AI brings with it a sense of familiarity from the other parts of our world. And if those other parts of our world, streaming, binge watching, Amazon shipping, etc., if those are legit, then why wouldn't AI be legit, right? It's a perfectly valid question, especially for our younger students who have kind of started school with generative AI being part of the environment. It's something that is part of the oxygen that they breathe. Why would it be? How could it be wrong? And then we also have, I think right now in our space, a relationship that pits students and teachers in constant conflict, right? If we follow those headlines that say all of our students are cheating, then the job of teachers becomes as to be a person who's just trying to catch the cheaters, right? And we then have a relationship of conflict. We have a relationship of stress and tension in our classroom. And that isn't necessarily going to open up a place of learning. And it certainly isn't going to be building a place of a relationship of trust where students and instructors can be vulnerable with each other. If I could go to the next slide, please. So what aren't we paying attention to when we pay attention to the popular conversations? Go back to the same sentences I used before. All students all the time are using AI to cheat. What if we looked at that a little bit differently, right? Critical media literacy would ask us to look a little bit beyond, well beyond the headlines, right? What about looking at the structural and systemic reasons that make it enticing for students to cheat, right? Our students are told from a really early age, right? I mean, I teach college, but I know my students come to college having heard for years, well before college, that they have to get a job. And so they spend a lot of time thinking about career and professional development, which is really valuable, but often at the expense of their learning, right? College is increasingly expensive, particularly at a time where everything else is becoming increasingly expensive. So we have to think about it, this sort of like the pressures that happen, economic pressures that are happening to our students. And they're told that they have to do so many things, that the idea of focusing on a class, my class or anybody else's for that matter, they've been told in so many different places that they can't concentrate on just one thing, that they have to do so many things. So when something like AI comes into the picture, it might feel initially like it's going to solve a problem. But what I've certainly found in conversation with students is that the stress of using AI to save time creates so much more anxiety and so much more stress, right? Go back to that sentence about the vibe of AI. If I say I'm not cheating, then I'm not cheating. Well, what about if we look at the culture of cheating that is rewarded in our society, right? Our students are growing up in an environment where cutting corners is rewarded, where being duplicitous is rewarded. I think we can talk about politics, we can talk about our elected officials, but we can also talk about our media of entertainment, right? Our students have grown up on a very sophisticated reality TV environment where the characters of reality TV, the more nefarious and deceptive they behave, the more attention they get. So why not behave this way? Our media of entertainment teach us that that is absolutely the way to get more attention. And I said in the previous slide, right, it constructs a relationship that puts teachers and students in constant conflict. So let's think about what it means to have that tension in a classroom, to have that that be the foundational relationship, which then diminishes the educational experience and builds mistrust. And I don't think there's anything that we can learn in a classroom or outside of it if we are mistrustful, right? Skeptical is different, right? Asking questions is different. Critical media literacy is all about continuous critical inquiry. It's about asking questions. But to ask questions is to be vulnerable, and to be vulnerable and feel okay about it is to be in a human community, collaborative environment that is grounded in trust. And once we mistrust our teachers or mistrust our students or mistrust education in general, we're probably hindering our learning. And there's going to be then a barrier to how we want to operate and how we want to be curious, because it's going to be scary and unsupported versus scary in a community where we're working together. So if I could have the next slide. So again, what we aren't paying attention to when we pay attention to the popular conversations, we need to have much more conversations about the corporate control. For now, AI use is free, but what happens, and I put that in scare quotes for a reason, right? What happens when companies start charging? We have had free access to AI to the point of we get quite used to it, right? It's on our smartphones, it's in our email systems, it's in our word processing programs. Yes, we can feed a prompt into a whole series of generative AIs. Generative AI companies, those corporations are willing to lose money now as a way of gathering users and gathering more data. At some point, they may choose to start charging. And if at that point we are so used to getting our information from that source, would we then be willing to pay for it, which then becomes a source of major profit for those corporations? Meanwhile, all this time, the reason why I use free in quotes is because we have paid a price. We pay with our time, we pay with our energy, we pay with our use, which then serves as a model for how to then make that use more refined. We are, in fact, doing a lot of work when we use generative AI or any digital technology. All of our data is captured. All of our data is monitored. We do a lot of work to help build these platforms without being rewarded for our work in any capacity, right? One of the things I often ask my students is, how many of them have jobs, and they raise their hands, and how many of them get a paycheck at the end of 2 weeks, and they raise their hands, and how many of you would be willing to not get your paycheck at the end of a couple of weeks? And they look at me like I have 3 heads. And then how many of you not only would be willing to not get a paycheck, but would be willing to give any earnings that you got back to your boss? And they are just simply staring at me at that point. But the point of it is that we do a lot of labor and we aren't necessarily compensated for it. So I think part of our AI literacy work is to look at that corporate control. These days in particular, especially connected to education, we need to be exploring the legal issues of AI. And I don't mean the corporations, although that is important, as I was saying before, but this cottage industry of lawyers that is growing, that supports students accused of academic misconduct, right? So we will have, in any level of our education, students who are accused of academic misconduct now have the opportunity to hire a lawyer to defend them to their school. These lawyers probably charge a 4-figure retainer and 3-figure hourly rate. Who can afford that, right? Whose families can afford to pay for that defense, which means we're going to start to see much greater inequity in our classrooms and in our schools when we have higher income students who can afford to defend themselves, whether they cheated or not, and our lower income students who are going to probably feel the pressures to use Gen AI, but don't necessarily have any support. So we have a whole legal industry that's growing up around the manipulation of generative AI. And I absolutely think we need to spend time, and media literacy, critical media literacy should pick this up, spend time on the environmental issues, right? These data centers and these servers monopolize electricity use and drive up costs. In any community where there are data centers, massive data centers, we see those community members are losing access to fresh and reliable water, and they're losing access to their own electricity while their costs are going up. I happen to be coming to you in this conversation from Arizona right now, a desert state that is going through a drought, and the community of Tucson, the city that I'm in right now, pushed back against the building of a data center, and because they didn't want it in their community. But also, what does it mean to build a data center in a city that is undergoing a massive drought? It's a really dangerous undertaking. What happens, though, is the corporations that are building those data centers, they don't necessarily pay the price, right? They get access to the water, they get access to the electricity, and the community members have their electricity potentially controlled for them. So their air conditioning temperatures will go up at peak times, their water pressure will go down at peak times. Their electric costs skyrocket because of these data centers that are sucking up the power. And then it just has an incredibly harmful impact on our ecosystems and on our environment. And in fact, back in, I believe it was January or February, the recommendation for users using any kind of generative AI was to not be polite to it, to don't say please or thank you, because that took up enough time and energy that it was driving up electrical use and water use. So we need to be thinking about, as I talked about a few moments ago, that culture of convenience, but what it is also doing to our environment. So if I could have the next slide. So it's hard, though, and I think, as we've heard from Michael and from Tori, that if we enter into our classroom spaces in kind of a combative, one size fits all, one chance is all we get environment, we absolutely will lose our students, right? Our students are concerned about AI use for a multitude of reasons. They do not want to be accused of cheating. That feels terrible, right? But they are hearing how much they will need to know how to use AI when they enter into the workforce, but they're scared of practicing it because it could be academic misconduct. Many of them are actually really resistant to it. They do not want this type of system doing their work for them. They want to be doing the work of thinking and of practicing. They want to be trying it out, but they don't want to be left behind for jobs. And all of this is pretty frightening. And I think so often in our classroom spaces, our students will look to their teachers as experts, as commanding a field, which for many topics is probably very true. But when we're looking at something like generative AI, similar to what we struggled with 6 years ago with the COVID pandemic, we're kind of all in this together, right? So I think of this as quite frightening, right? It scares me a little bit in my own classroom space, but it also gives us the opportunity to consider a critical and compassionate approach. Let's start by talking with, and more importantly, listening to our students and their concerns and hopes for AI. What is it that they are struggling with? What is it that they are hoping to see? What is it that they might be a little bit afraid of or eager about? What can they teach us, right? We are all in this together. So what can they teach us? Absolutely, unequivocally, 1000% drawing from my own learning from Tori Trust. Where possible, co-create an AI policy together with students. And when that policy is created, be really transparent as the instructor about our own AI use. If I forbid, as an instructor, if I forbid my students to use it for assignments, then it's only fair that my students should know or should demand of me that I will not use it to grade their assignments, right? So be transparent about our own AI use. I think thus far, it's been really easy to think of it as kind of a one direction. It's students using or misusing these technologies. But what about us, right? We're a part of this too. So being transparent about our own AI use and why we are or are not using it. I don't want to use AI in my classroom, and I want to carve out a space where we're not using it as a way of thinking through it, not to ignore its existence, but how can we think through what it is that we're trying to do, that messy space of learning, right? So I really want to practice that and model practicing that. And let's expand our classroom conversations beyond the headlines, right? Our headlines come to us fast and furious. They want to be salacious so that they get our eyeballs on it, right? I mean, this is kind of old school critical media literacy is, that fancy headline, that salacious headline is what's going to get our eyeballs to that piece of information. So let's work beyond the headlines. Let's work in the day to day. Let's work in just our own lives. And if I could have the next slide, please. Tools and strategies for the classroom. This is some work that I have done with my colleague. You can see the website there, Nolan Higdon. He's somebody that I've worked with on some of our critical media literacy and surveillance work, and we have a downloadable free PDF on this website about teaching critical AI, ways to bring it into the classroom. There are opportunities for it to be pretty sophisticated and fancy in terms of its technology, but it's also pretty low tech, pretty lo-fi, kind of DIY, how we can all work together. And I think that's really sort of the overarching idea is that we need to be in community, we need to be in conversation and in collaboration with our students, and that's how we're going to make change. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Allison, for this wonderful presentation. Your message reminds us that in the age of AI, critical thinking and human judgment remain our most important tools. Today, we have explored 3 key areas of modern education. Tori showed us the scientific why behind student learning. Michael provided the practical how of stabilizing our classroom to reduce stress. And Allison gave us the evaluative tools of media literacy to master the AI transition. Today, these perspectives help us see education in a more complete way.
Now I would like to invite our 3 distinguished speakers, Tori, Michael, and Allison, to please turn on your cameras and join me on the virtual stage for our roundtable discussion. By far, we have received many thoughtful questions from our social media followers and from our global audience. And Zoom participants, please feel free to type your questions in the chat. To begin, I would like to invite all 3 speakers to share their thoughts on the following question we collected from our social media follower. The question is, my classroom includes students with very different personalities, motivations, and learning preferences. Some thrive in competition, while others feel discouraged by comparison. I often struggle to balance engagement, fairness, and emotional well-being. So this teacher's question is, how can instructional design support both engagement and equity while meeting diverse learner needs? How can we create more personalized and fair learning experiences for all students?
I'm happy to start with this one. I think this one builds off of the model that I presented earlier, specifically the universal design for learning, which makes sense. Every classroom that you're in, students have different backgrounds and experiences and needs and wants, and how do you address that all, whether that's 20 students or 400 students? Universal design for learning is really about, making sure everyone is included in the classroom and is able to access and achieve learning. And so in that case, I think choice becomes really powerful. Not giving one assignment that everyone has to do, because if you have, for example, a quiz that's gamified and there's a leaderboard like Kahoot does. You have some students like me who will try super hard to be at the very top of that leaderboard. And you have some students, like some of my international students, who say, it takes so long for me to, translate the language into my native or home language and then back and then be able to respond that I get too nervous and I've sometimes pressed the wrong button. And I've left all of those students out if I'm just doing that one assignment. Um, and it's graded, right? So that's where, multiple options. You can still do the gamification type experiments with like a competition, but making sure, one, that's not your only way of grading student learning, and two, that there's other ways that students can engage in and show their knowledge. So you might follow up an experience like a competition type thing with here's 4 other ways to show your knowledge. Do you want to create a mural? Do you want to design a stop motion animation? Do you want to write a poem about what we just learned? Or do you want to write an article for a local newspaper or a classroom newsletter, something like that? Then you'll find that the more that you give choice, the more that students are able to pick something that best fits their needs and breaks down those barriers.
Thank you, Tori. Allison, Michael,
Yeah,
and
I would add a little bit to that. That one of the things that I try and do with my students is sometimes I try and kind of get away a little bit from the topic and try and think about what the topic might be getting to or what we want the students to get to, right? So like I do want them to think about the topic and to think about what we're addressing, but sometimes it's also like in the assignments that I give, I try and talk about the bigger thing that they're learning. So for example, in my classes, I have uh, they do some civic engagement assignments. There's a few different options depending on the semester. And this semester I have two. One is a full school presentation on something. They will create a presentation on digital citizenship. And the other is a writing project where they get a news story published. And before I even have them think about the choices, I have them think about something bigger than that, right? Do they want to be in front of other people? Do they want the immediate gratification of, presenting to a live audience? Are they okay with not like, are they interested in not having anything to do with being in front of people? Do they want to do more behind the scenes, right? What do they want to get out of their own learning? And then we'll talk about the assignment. And that way they can sort of situate themselves into their own learning desires and their own learning styles, and then be able to pick what works better for them. Some of these projects happen in a couple of other classes, so it's also an opportunity to say, do you want to learn two different things, or do you want to go really deep into the same, like a similar assignment in multiple places? And so then they can start to think about their own goals and their own strengths and maybe their struggles and what they want to work on, so that they have a couple of those different options.
thank you, Allison.
Yeah, I liked what both Allison and Tori said. I'll only add that I think good instruction followed by clarity in what's expected and checking for understanding and ensure the students have all the tools they need to be successful before sending them off. Because I think that makes everyone feel uh, that they have purpose and competence. And I think it keeps students happy and enjoying their learning.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for all thoughtful answers. And it's interesting that our speakers mentioned gamified learning, because we do have a question from a teacher, a K-12 teacher in China, who asked questions about gamified learning. So the teacher said, I'm concerned that gamified learning may weaken students' intrinsic motivation when too much attention is drawn to the game itself rather than the learning content, with heavy reliance on rewards, points, levels in games, and competition. And the teacher felt similarly, while AI tools can make tasks easier, they may also reduce opportunities for productive struggle. So the question that teacher asked is, how can educators use AI and digital tools or games in ways that support curiosity, deep thinking, and intrinsic motivation, rather than creating dependence on external rewards, like rewards in games or shortcuts?
So I just finished right before this conference, right before this presentation started. I just finished grading an assignment that I had given my students, where my TA and I wrote a whole bunch of papers. Some of them were Gen AI. Some of them were actually, to be honest, things that I had written as a human being that had been rejected. So I knew they were nowhere online. They were just only on my hard drive. And I had my students grade them. So I gave them a rubric and I gave them some directions about what to look for. And then they would do a reflection on what they figured out of this sort of human versus AI. So I wanted to kind of my motivation for that and what I explained to them was I wanted them to see the other side, right? As students, they're so often being put in the position of feeding generative AI, right? As I said earlier, like everybody is cheating. Not true, of course, but or this is what students are doing. So I wanted them to see the other side. What does something that is created by Gen AI look like? What does something that's created, can you tell the difference, right? So it gives them the opportunity to see a different side. As I said, I just finished grading them, so I haven't talked to my students about it yet as a class. But I for sure learned so much from it. I learned how they are thinking and how they are seeing the work. And reading, 20 plus generative AI created papers gave me a lot of information about what it looks like these days. And so my hope for when I meet with my class again is that we can have that kind of collaborative conversation about what it means to be on both sides of the conversation.
Go
I'm
ahead.
happy to talk about one model that I think is really helpful when it comes to instructional design is Bloom's taxonomy. It's a very basic model from many, many years ago, but the way it's designed as a pyramid, the bottom is at the remember and understand level, right? Memorizing something, being able to explain it, and then you work all the way up to create, which is create new knowledge. Creating a podcast that summarizes something, still at the bottom, lower order thinking. Creating a podcast about what might have happened if, the 2022 World Cup didn't happen in a certain way, and what does that mean for the culture of that country? That's creating new knowledge. When it comes to digital tools and apps and games and gamification, it depends what level of thinking you want to get students at. I think there's no problem with gamification if it comes to something like memorization. I can't tell you the number of trivia nights that I've gone to where someone's quizzed me on something, and because I got it wrong at trivia night, I have not ever forgotten that. If you want something students to like remember a long time, games can be really helpful. If you want to engage students in higher order thinking where they are analyzing, evaluating, creating new knowledge, you either have to find different tools or you have to think differently about the tools, right? The example Allison gave was AI becomes the object of critical analysis rather than replacing critical analysis. I've written prompts that have turned AI into a simulation for a debate or a simulation for a emergency room and a nurse who has to think through vital signs to learn about different cardiovascular systems. In that case, AI is prompting the learner to think rather than the learner is prompting AI to think. And so with some creative thinking, you can use digital tools and apps to kind of reach every level of Bloom's taxonomy and engage students at different levels of thinking, but it really I think falls on the teacher and how they decide to use that tool and not consistently staying at the bottom of Bloom's taxonomy.
Thank you, Tori. And Michael, please go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I certainly share the concern. And Tori kind of took the words out of my mouth. I think things like, memorizing times tables or something like that, there could be some value in gamification for something like that. But it's not something would be comfortable yet using in my own classroom.
Thank you, Michael. And next we have a teacher ask a question about classroom management and student engagement. So that teacher said, I understand effective classroom management often requires balancing clear structure with opportunities for student autonomy. So my question is, how can we, educator teachers, create learning environments that are both well managed and flexible enough to support student agency and ownership of learning?
I love this question. When I was talking about preparing students and giving them the tools, that's before sending them off to work independently, which I think is really, really important. Independently can also mean group work, but preparing them for success, giving them everything they need, and then really turning it over to them. Being reluctant, observing as a teacher, but being reluctant to get too involved in that. I think a lot of learning, a lot of good learning happens, a lot of autonomy, and a lot of confidence in learning and their skills comes from really shifting responsibility over to students. Oh, and good classroom management allows you to do that. The structure of here's what's expected. Here's my job, and now here's your job. My job is to teach this lesson and prepare you. Now it's your job to do the project or whatever you've chosen to fulfill the objective.
I agree with what Michael is saying. And I think one thing I want to point out is I think there's a huge misconception around classroom management being that if your administrator walks by, your students are quiet, right? And so there's a lot of fear of if I hand over something to my students, they might be loud, they might be experimenting, they might explore, something might go wrong. And how do I handle all of that when I'm trying to manage this class and keep them under control, right? And those are not right necessarily the words you want to be using. Keep them under control, keep them silent, keep them quiet. Classroom management is the things that Michael talked about, building those relationships, engaging them, the finding the intrinsic motivation. And so what I find is you as the educator, you yourself have to be vulnerable and give up your own thoughts about what control really is if you really want to bring student agency into the classroom. Because I can assure you, they will take you in directions you had not expected, and you just have to be ready for that. But I think giving that student agency improves classroom management. So I think those two can go positively hand in hand, and we need to get rid of this the sense that if my students are silently working, the classroom is being managed.
Thank you, Tori. And we have another question. So feels like we are moving beyond classroom management. Then we are thinking about teachers are thinking about assessment and assignments. So after class, so the teacher asks, as my students increasingly using tools like ChatGPT to write essays, solve math problems, or complete their homework, simply banning AI from my classroom may not be effective. How should my assignments and assessments evolve so that AI can be used as a learning support while still developing students' critical thinking, reasoning, and their independent understanding?
I would address that by pointing to Tori. My AI policies in my class are absolutely directly built from her AI policies and the way that she writes about them, right? I do think that we are in a place right now of great fear about AI. And I think that, like so many of our other technologies, it's, with a lot of change and a lot of disappointment and a lot of fumbling along the way, we will settle into what our actual relationship is with AI. But to ban it right now is enticing, and I absolutely do for certain assignments. But I also make that part of the conversation, which is definitely something I learned from Tori about the idea of, and to write it down. I've been talking about it, but I write it down. I have it in my syllabus. I have a document specifically about it, and so that I share my thinking, and that I share what I value about it. But that's also my need to be organized at the start of the semester, right? I want to come in ready to go, and also have the willingness and the flexibility to maybe shift that around as we learn more, right? That's a little scary to change midstream, because that can be really unfair to students. There's no doubt about it. But if I can be bringing it up as a conversation from the very beginning of the semester, then ideally we can work together as a group. That doesn't seem to be needed right now. I think when we go back to 2023, that was my initial AI policy, was we don't really know what this is yet. So we're going to figure it out pretty much each assignment. The opening bid is nope until we talk about it, right? So, how much can we really work on our own flexibility, which is, I'm somebody who likes to have my class organized at the start of the semester. It helps my stress levels, but I also have to recognize how much change is happening all the time. So how can I have it ready and also be ready to change it up?
Yeah, and I just want to address the part of how do you change your assignments, right? I think I agree with Allison. You absolutely need an AI policy in your syllabus across all grade levels, or at least conversations with students. But it really comes back to the concept of the renewable assessment, right? For how I would shift things is in class time. If you want to do handwritten things or things where you can like make their learning visible to you in real time so you can really see what they're thinking, which is usually what homework's reserved for, right? Bring that stuff into the classroom, and then for homework, engage students in meaningful, valuable activities. Have them take what they've learned in class and apply it. They're learning math, go redesign a playground for a local school to make it more accessible for individuals with disabilities. They're learning science, have them go out in the community and collect data and then bring it into class the next day that they can analyze and make sense of that. They're learning history, have them go act like a historian outside of school. These kind of changes can happen in every subject so that homework is something they're excited to do because there's value in it to them. And then when they come into the classroom, you can flip that kind of like, time for them to make their learning, their thinking visible to you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Tori, Michael, and Allison. So for this super rich and meaningful discussion, we could continue this conversation for maybe another hour, but we are running out of time. And there's still so much to explore in this topic. And as we conclude, one idea is very clear. While educational tools continue to change, evolve, the heart of the classroom remains the educator.
Totally agree with you. So today we moved beyond the tool. We have learned that whether it's the science of how a student processes information, or the calm environment a teacher creates, or the critical judgment that we apply to AI, the human element is the essential one in our equation. When the foundation is strong, technology doesn't just add to our workload, it multiplies our impact.
So we would like to express our sincere thanks to our wonderful panelists for sharing their time, knowledge, and experience with us today. We also thank our audience both here on Zoom and across our global live stream platforms. Thank you for your thoughtful questions and active participation. Your engagement has made today's conversation even more meaningful.
We also want to thank our team of staff and the Harvard China Education Symposium for making this panel possible. For those who joined later or want to revisit today's insight, the recording will be available on our YouTube channel and shared via our WeChat groups.
We hope you leave today not only with new ideas, new tools, but also with a stronger sense of your own power as an educator.
Thank you so much for being part of this journey. We look forward to seeing you at our future sessions. And the next panel, starting in 1 minute, is Reframing Change, Family Education. So we would encourage you to keep following us and let's stay tuned. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.